Hand over the folder. We have reason to believe it contains evidence.
This is protected health information. I'm afraid I can't do that.
The fluorescent buzz of the hospital lobby flickered over Mariah Cole as she wheeled the last supply cart toward the elevator. She had been on her feet for 12 hours, but exhaustion paled beside the simmering irritation when a uniformed officer stepped in front of her. "Hold it," he barked, eyes narrowing. "Where do you think you're going with that?" "I'm taking these ICU," she replied, tone clipped but polite. Her ID badge glinted under the harsh light. He ignored it. "Step aside. We have reports of theft in this area." A nurse passing by shot her a glance, hesitant, then quickly turned. Mariah's chest tightened. "I haven't taken anything," she said, louder, frustration breaking. The officer's smirk was sharp, predatory. "Funny. The camera footage says otherwise. Now, hand behind your back." Metal cuffs bit into her wrists. Colleagues clustered, phones raised, but no one stepped forward. The hum of the lobby felt suffocating. Mariah's heart hammered. Her mind raced. Her credentials, her authority, the hospital director title that meant nothing in the eyes of this man. Her face burned, a public display of humiliation. "You're not above the law," he spat. "I am in this hospital," she hissed under her breath, but it fell on deaf ears. The elevator doors opened, its sting slicing through the tension. Mariah's wrists ached. The officer's grip tightened. She swallowed, silent fury burning beneath controlled panic. One wrong look, one whispered rumor, could define this night. The officer jerked her toward the elevator, and just as she stepped inside, her phone vibrated violently in her pocket, a message from aboard. "Emergency meeting. Now." She froze. The doors closed. The fluorescent buzz of the hospital lobby flickered over Mariah Cole as she wheeled the last supply cart toward the elevator. She had been on her feet for 12 hours, but exhaustion paled beside the simmering irritation when a uniformed officer stepped in front of her. "Hold it," he barked, eyes narrowing. "Where do you think you're going with that?" "I'm taking these ICU," she replied, tone clipped but polite. Her ID badge glinted under the harsh light. He ignored it. "Step aside. We have reports of theft in this area." A nurse passing by shot her a glance, hesitant, then quickly turned. Mariah's chest tightened. "I haven't taken anything," she said, louder, frustration breaking. The officer's smirk was sharp, predatory. "Funny. The camera footage says otherwise. Now, hand behind your back." Metal cuffs bit into her wrists. Colleagues clustered, phones raised, but no one stepped forward. The hum of the lobby felt suffocating. Mariah's heart hammered. Her mind raced. Her credentials, her authority, the hospital director title that meant nothing in the eyes of this man. Her face burned, a public display of humiliation. "You're not above the law," he spat. "I am in this hospital," she hissed under her breath, but it fell on deaf ears. The elevator doors opened, its sting slicing through the tension. Mariah's wrists ached. The officer's grip tightened. She swallowed, silent fury burning beneath controlled panic. One wrong look, one whispered rumor, could define this night. The officer jerked her toward the elevator, and just as she stepped inside, her phone vibrated violently in her pocket, a message from aboard. "Emergency meeting. Now." She froze. The doors closed. The holding room smelled of disinfectant and old coffee. Fluorescent lights flickered overhead, harsh and unrelenting. Mariah sat rigid on the metal bench, wrists still stinging from the cuffs. Officer Daniels leaned against the wall, arms crossed, smirking as if the entire scenario was some private amusement. "You're making this difficult," he said, pacing slowly. "We have procedures. You can either cooperate or make things worse for yourself." "I've already complied," Mariah replied, her voice steady despite the heat rising in her chest. "I'm a hospital director. I've shown my ID. The footage proves I didn't take anything." Daniel's smirk widened. "Footage? You think I trust a camera over a report? I've been doing this job long enough to know when someone's lying. And I know when someone doesn't belong in my hospital or anywhere else." A detective in a gray suit lingered near the doorway, flipping through a file. He avoided eye contact, watching silently as Daniel circled Mariah. "We just need to confirm your story," he said without conviction, as if his words existed only to preserve the illusion of fairness. Mariah's jaw tightened. The room felt smaller by the second. Each step Daniels took was deliberate, a demonstration of control. She tried to keep her breathing even, focusing on the sounds around her, the faint hum of a fan, the scratch of a pen on a notepad, the echo of her own heartbeat in her ears. "You know," Daniel said, lowering his voice, "I've heard stories about nurses like you. Big responsibilities, big ambitions, but some people get greedy. You're lucky we caught you before someone else did." Mariah's fingers curled into fists. "Greedy? You're accusing me of theft because of the color of my skin," she spat. "You're abusing your authority. This is racial profiling." Daniels laughed, short and sharp. "Profiling? Don't be dramatic. We're all just doing our jobs." The detective flipped a page, murmuring something about procedural delays. Mariah caught fragments, evidence, discrepancy, statement, all words meant to cage her, to control the narrative. Hours dragged, each minute punctuated by Daniel's thinly veiled hostility and the occasional clang of a distant cell door. Mariah's initial shock had calcified into a cold, simmering anger. She refused to look defeated, refused to give him satisfaction. Her phone buzzed again, a single vibration cutting through the tension. She glimpsed a text from a hospital board member. "We are aware. Hold tight. Legal team on standby." A small relief, quickly drowned by the grim reality. She was alone in a room with a man who had unchecked power over her freedom, and no one could change that until the legal system acted. Daniels leaned closer, his face inches from hers. "You should learn quickly," Director Cole. "Authority doesn't mean a thing outside these walls." Mariah didn't flinch. "Neither does yours when the truth comes out," she said softly, but her words carried an unshakable weight. The room fell silent for a beat. Then Daniel straightened, moving to the door. "We'll see how the law deals with someone like you," he said, voice laced with contempt. Mariah exhaled, sinking slightly onto the bench. Her wrists burned, her body ached, but she refused to give in. Every fiber of her being focused on endurance, on clarity, on preserving herself within the walls of injustice. She realized this wasn't just about her. It was about every patient she had served, every colleague who had been silently judged, every subtle injustice ignored. Daniel's aggression wasn't a random incident. It was a thread in a larger pattern. The detective finally approached, holding a clipboard. "We'll need your statement," he said, avoiding her eyes again. "When you're ready." Mariah nodded, steadying herself. Each word she would speak had to carry precision, not panic. This was no longer a mere defense of self. It was a challenge to the system that had allowed Daniel's behavior to go unchecked. The cuffs clicked open, and Mariah rubbed her wrists, ignoring the sting. Her mind was already strategizing, calculating the next moves, weighing the weight of every syllable she would offer. Daniel's smirk lingered in her peripheral vision, a shadow she would carry into every courtroom, every negotiation, every public confrontation. As she stood, the air between them seemed to hum with tension. This was not over. It had only begun. Back at the hospital, the absence of Mariah Cole was a palpable void. ICU nurses exchanged uneasy glances as monitors beeped steadily, patients shifted in beds, and the hum of ventilators filled the room. The news of her arrest had spread faster than any infection, a viral whisper echoing down hallways, whispered in break rooms, muttered over the cafeteria trays. She's in custody," a young nurse asked hesitantly, eyes wide. "Apparently," another replied, voice tight, as if speaking louder might summon Daniel's patrol car through the walls. "Someone said it's theft. Can you believe it?" The words felt surreal. Mariah wasn't just any nurse. She was a hospital director. Her absence left a vacuum of authority, and the staff felt acutely. Orders that normally required no debate now hesitated at every step. Supplies were mismanaged. Critical decisions were delayed. The hospital's rhythm faltered. In the director's office, a small group of senior staff huddled around a muted phone call with the board. "We need to manage this carefully," said Dr. Linton, chief of surgery, pacing the room. "The media's already circling. One wrong word, One rumor amplified. This could ruin the hospital's reputation. But it's not her fault, whispered another administrator. She's a victim here. Dr. Linton's gaze was hard. Victim or not, the public perception matters. We have to stay neutral, procedural, compliant. No one wants another headline about a nurse being arrested, especially not the director. Outside the boardroom, whispers threaded through the corridors. A patient's relative muttered about a scandal. A tech called a friend in hushed tones. Nurses exchanged texts. Photos of the patrol car parked outside circulating like evidence in a trial. The hospital, usually a sanctuary of healing, had become a theater of tension. Meanwhile, a reporter from a local news station arrived at the front entrance, camera crew in tow. "We're covering the story about the nurse arrested at the hospital," the reporter said to the receptionist, not hiding the eagerness in her voice. "Can we get a statement?" The receptionist hesitated, caught between protocol and pressure. I can't comment," she stammered, glancing toward the elevators, imagining Mariah in handcuffs. Hallway conversations carried undertones of racial bias no one dared acknowledge aloud. "I mean, maybe there's more to the story," one nurse said cautiously. It's odd, isn't it? I've never seen anything like this here." A senior nurse, Martha, shook her head. "Odd isn't the word. And it doesn't matter what color she is. But some people, always assume the worst when it's her skin." Another nurse's phone buzzed. A screenshot from a social media post showed a cropped image of Mariah being led out in handcuffs. Comments varied, judgmental, dismissive, and some quietly enraged. The viral spread of her arrest amplified humiliation into a collective spectacle. Back in the director's office, the board's voice was clipped through the speakerphone. "We're aware of the incident," one member said. "We'll support her legally, but we must be cautious about internal messaging. Employees are already anxious. Morale could collapse if this spreads unchecked." Dr. Linton pressed a mute button after a tense moment. "Caution? We're already beyond caution. Staff are scared, patients are unsettled, and the media is circling like vultures. The hospital functions because of her leadership. Without her, everything feels off." A younger nurse frowned. "And people are treating this like it's normal. Like being detained by the police doesn't matter if it's a director. No one steps up to defend her because it's uncomfortable." "Exactly," Martha said grimly. "Uncomfortable doesn't fix injustice. Silence doesn't protect anyone. But it's easier to whisper, pretend it's someone else's problem, and avoid conflict." The conversation was interrupted by another phone call. The reporter was persistent, wanting a comment from the hospital's legal department. "We cannot provide a statement," the administrator said. "The matter is under legal review." Still, the camera crew lingered in the parking lot, lenses angled toward the hospital's main doors. Staff moving between floors felt the weight of observation. Every glance was magnified, every step interpreted. In the break room, whispers turned into subdued debates. "Do you think Daniels, the officer, even understands who she is?" one nurse asked, frowning. "I don't think it matters to him," another replied. "He sees a uniform to enforce, a narrative to control. He doesn't see a director. He sees assumptions." Meanwhile, someone finally approached HR with a tentative complaint. I saw what happened. It wasn't right. She didn't do anything." The HR manager nodded, typing slowly, but a nervous glance betrayed hesitation. Institutional procedures felt inadequate, slow-moving, designed to absorb outrage rather than act. The hospital's network buzzed with texts and internal messaging, attempting to piece together facts amidst speculation. Security footage had been pulled for review, but no one outside the legal team had access. Rumors filled the gaps, accusations, defenses, anger, confusion. Through it all, Mariah's absence resonated like an invisible pressure. The hospital ran, but it felt fragile, tense, like a building under unseen stress. Staff avoided open confrontation with authority figures. Patients felt it too, subtle but present, a lack of leadership echoing in delays, miscommunications, and quiet unease. At the end of the day, the receptionist looked up at the CCTV monitor. There she was, Mariah Cole, cuffed, escorted by Daniels, expression calm but firm. It was a single frame frozen in time, yet it captured the weight of injustice and disbelief. No one spoke. Everyone watched. And somewhere in the building, Mariah's phone buzzed again. A text from the board. We're mobilizing support. Stay strong. Evidence is being compiled. The hallways remained silent, heavy with whispers that could not undo the public shaming but could document it. Staff lingered at thresholds, uncertain, fearful, powerless, but awake to the systemic fault lines that had allowed this to happen. Mariah sat in a small, sterile legal office, the hum of the overhead fluorescent lights mirroring the tension thrumming through her chest. Her wrists had been freed hours ago, but the ache lingered, a sharp reminder of the morning's humiliation. Papers were scattered across the table, each envelope, document, and folder a potential weapon in the fight she had been forced into. Her lawyer, Marcus Reynolds, a sharp-eyed man in his mid-40s, leaned forward. You did nothing wrong, Mariah. This is clear. But the system doesn't always see truth first. We'll need to move fast and carefully. Mariah nodded, her jaw tight. I need them to see the facts. Not just the footage, but the context. My ID, the authorization, the hours I worked today. She trailed off, thinking about the uniformed man who had treated her like a criminal. And the motive. Why would they do this to me? Bias is rarely admitted openly, Marcus said. But it's always there. In Daniel's reports, the initial arrest, the way the precinct handled your identification. It's woven into the system. We expose that, we have a chance. A knock at the door interrupted them. Paralegal files in hand. She stepped in quietly. Court summons came through. Preliminary hearing scheduled for next week. Officer Daniels has requested the maximum procedural delay, citing evidence verification. Mariah's chest tightened. Delay? Why delay? They already acted without verification this morning. That's how it works, Marcus said, tapping a pen against the table. They drag it out, hoping people forget, hoping you get tired. But we won't let that happen. She leaned back, absorbing the legal reality she had never faced directly. Power wielded to maintain control, procedures twisted to favor authority over truth. Her hospital experience had demanded leadership under stress, but this was an entirely different battlefield. Her opponent was faceless bureaucracy amplified by Daniel's personal bias. Do you have any witnesses? She asked. Yes, Marcus replied. Several colleagues saw you at the time of the alleged theft. Footage from multiple hospital cameras. HR reports. And the board is prepared to testify to your role and responsibilities. Mariah exhaled, a mix of relief and frustration. And Daniels, how do we prove his motives? Marcus tapped his fingers against his folder. Indirectly. Previous complaints, internal reports, inconsistencies in his story. Pattern evidence. We expose the bias without ever having to accuse directly. The law works in patterns and probabilities, not always absolutes. Her phone buzzed. Another message from the board. Prepare talking points. Media strategy. Stay strong. Hospital operations stable for now, but watch internal communications. Mariah's hands tightened around the edge of the table. Media strategy. Talking points. Even now, her life had been dissected, catalogued, manipulated. Daniel's single act of racial profiling had rippled through her personal and professional world. The next hour was a blur of phone calls and document preparation. Marcus dictated letters, his tone precise, calm, commanding. Mariah repeated facts, refined her testimony, drilled herself on the timeline. Dialogue became armor. Every sentence rehearsed, every phrase weighed for accuracy and emotional impact. Finally, Marcus sat back, exhausted but determined. We'll file a motion to expedite. Delay tactics won't hold against public scrutiny once evidence is in play. But you need to stay composed. One misstep, one emotional outburst, Daniel's narrative gains ground. Mariah nodded, swallowing the knot of fury in her throat. She was trained to respond to emergencies, to make life or death decisions quickly. But here, injustice moved at its own pace, calculated, impersonal, yet intensely personal. She had no control over the system, but she could control her response. The phone rang again. This time, It was a hospital board member. Mariah, they said, voice urgent. We're backing you fully. Legal team is aligned. Communications are prepped. But Daniels is already spinning the story in internal memos. Be ready to counter misinformation. Her fingers tapped the desk in quiet frustration. He doesn't know who he's dealing with, she said quietly, though the weight of the moment pressed down on her. Her identity as hospital director, her authority, the respect she had cultivated over years, it was invisible in the eyes of someone blinded by prejudice. Marcus leaned forward again. Tomorrow, we start depositions, get statements from witnesses, footage from cameras, emails, reports. Every detail counts. And remember, we expose bias through facts, not emotion. Mariah's mind ran through every interaction, every step in the ICU that day, every subtle assumption made by colleagues, every glance of doubt, every hesitation. She realized now that Daniel's act was not an anomaly but a culmination of systemic patterns. The legal process would be her battlefield, and precision would be her weapon. Hours later, as she left the office, the sun had dipped behind the city skyline. The hospital loomed in the distance, quiet yet teeming with whispers. Mariah's absence had left cracks, and every staff member had felt them. But this fight wasn't just about her vindication. It was about exposing the threads of prejudice that had allowed Daniel's actions to occur unchecked. Her car pulled into the hospital parking lot for a brief stop. She stayed seated, gripping the steering wheel, taking in the familiar facade of glass and steel. The lobby lights reflected faintly on the windshield, almost like eyes watching, silently judging. The internal struggle, the anger, the fear, the resolve, fought with every beat of her heart. She stepped out, walking briskly past staff who avoided eye contact. Conversations paused briefly, then resumed in hushed tones. She caught snippets. Arrested, director, police, the tension clung to the hallways like dust. Inside, she paused at the elevator, looking at her reflection in the polished steel doors. Dark circles beneath her eyes, her posture slightly stiff from hours spent in legal preparation. Yet her gaze was unwavering. Daniel's attempt to diminish her power had failed in one crucial way. She had not surrendered her mind, her will, or her narrative. As the elevator doors closed, a notification vibrated in her pocket. Another message from the board. We are documenting everything. Evidence. Witnesses. Stay strong. Justice will be served. Mariah pressed the phone against her chest for a moment, inhaling deeply. The next steps were clear. The legal fight was only beginning, but her resolve had hardened. Daniel's arrogance would meet methodical truth, and the first chapter of justice, though slow, was about to unfold. Mariah entered the hospital boardroom via the side door, keeping her head low, wrists freshly freed but still tender. The room smelled of polished wood and stale coffee, a sharp contrast to the tension brimming in the air. Several board members sat around the elongated table, eyes flicking up as she stepped in, whispering behind folders and half-empty mugs. Director Cole, said Chairwoman Reynolds, voice clipped. We're relieved you're back. Mariah straightened, meeting the gaze of each member. I'm here, she said evenly, letting her presence fill the room. But being relieved isn't enough. We have to address what happened. Systemically, institutionally, this was not an isolated incident. A younger board member shifted nervously. We've received multiple calls from staff and media. The hospital's reputation, the situation has escalated quickly. Mariah's lips pressed together. The reputation is irrelevant if we fail to protect our people. You must understand, the officer's actions were fueled by racial bias. This is not just about me. This is about every employee and patient subjected to assumptions and unchecked authority. The room fell quiet. A projector flickered to life as she connected her phone, showing security footage from the ICU and lobby. Mariah narrated succinctly, her voice steady, eyes scanning the room for reactions. Each frame highlighted her legitimacy, ID badges clearly visible, equipment properly handled, procedures followed. Daniel's behavior was unmistakable in every clip, approaching with aggression, ignoring credentials, pressing cuffs without cause. This evidence confirms my claims, she said. I am not only a nurse, I am the hospital director. These actions represent systemic negligence and racial profiling. Staff witnessed this, and yet procedures were bypassed. The question is, how do we prevent this from happening again? Chairwoman Reynolds cleared her throat. Mariah, we were not aware of your exact position during the incident. That changes the narrative significantly. Mariah's jaw tightened. It shouldn't change the narrative. Whether a nurse, director, or volunteer, no one deserves to be publicly humiliated or subjected to racial bias. Authority shouldn't shield you from abuse. It should amplify accountability. Daniels must be held accountable, and the hospital must implement safeguards. Another board member spoke, hesitantly. So, you're saying we need to restructure reporting lines for incidents involving law enforcement and strengthen legal oversight? Yes, Mariah said firmly, and we need proactive communication. Staff must know their rights, and we must ensure immediate, transparent investigation protocols. Silence and avoidance only perpetuate injustice. Her phone buzzed. A new message from Marcus. Court prep begins tomorrow. Evidence strong. Watch Daniels' past complaints. Media may probe. Maintain composure. Mariah glanced at the screen, and then back to the board. Her reflection in the polished table surface showed tension etched into her features, but also clarity. She had been reduced to a statistic, a viral headline, a case number, and now she reclaimed her authority not with anger but with strategic action. You understand the risk? Chairwoman Reynolds asked softly. Daniels' arrest and the ensuing media frenzy, this could destabilize hospital operations further. I understand completely, Mariah replied. But leaving this unchecked destabilizes staff trust more. Fear spreads faster than rumor. Staff are already whispering, doubting procedures, questioning leadership. Our first responsibility is their safety and confidence, not optics alone. A senior board member nodded. We will support you legally. The hospital will file an official complaint against Officer Daniels and document every step of your treatment and his misconduct. We will provide witness statements and security logs. Mariah's chest tightened, a mixture of relief and lingering fury. It's not enough to correct this incident, she said. We must confront the larger pattern, the institutional assumptions that allowed this to happen. Pattern? The young board member asked. Yes, Mariah said firmly. Bias is rarely a single act. Daniels has a history of complaints, dismissed or ignored. Policies permit him and others like him to act with impunity. We'll compile all records, expose systemic failures, and implement a review board. Justice is not merely punitive, it's structural. It's prevention. The board absorbed her words, murmuring agreement, the tension in the room shifting from anxiety to measured determination. Mariah allowed herself a small exhale. She had taken back a narrative, reclaimed her authority, and now had the institutional backing to translate personal injustice into systemic action. Tomorrow, she continued, we begin legal preparation, depositions, witness statements, evidence logs. I will testify. The media must be guided responsibly. Internal staff must be reassured. Daniel's actions will be exposed, but our hospital's integrity must remain intact. This is not revenge, it's accountability. The room nodded. Chairwoman Reynolds' voice softened, almost reverential. Director Cole, your leadership, we underestimated the immediacy of your presence. We will follow your guidance. Mariah tapped the tabletop lightly, her reflection mirrored in polished wood. This was more than vindication. This was strategy. Every staff member who had felt powerless, every nurse silenced by protocol or fear, would now see action. Daniel's arrogance would meet meticulous truth, and the hospital would no longer tolerate prejudice hidden behind uniforms and badges. As the board members filed out, Mariah remained seated, reviewing notes and footage. Her mind calculated courtroom steps, staff briefings, and public messaging. Each interaction Daniels had attempted to weaponize now became evidence against him. Her phone buzzed again. Another message from the board. Evidence team assembling. Media strategy confirmed. Legal counsel prepped. Hold fast. Tomorrow is a beginning. Mariah's gaze lifted to the windows, looking out over the city skyline. The hospital that had been a stage for her humiliation was now her command center for justice. Every corridor, every office, every whispering staff member would soon witness the recalibration of power. Daniel's abuse would not disappear into the shadows. The fight was no longer personal alone. It was institutional, systemic, and unavoidable. The courthouse smelled of polished wood in nervous anticipation. Mariah's heels clicked against the marble floor as she entered, each step measured, each breath controlled. Journalists jostled for space in the gallery, cameras angled for the most dramatic shot, the lens hungry for the story that had already gone viral. Officer Daniels sat at the prosecution table, posture rigid, jaw clenched, trying to radiate authority. Mariah took her seat beside Marcus, scanning the courtroom. The judge, a stern woman with an unwavering gaze, banged the gavel, signaling the start of proceedings. The air was taut with expectation, a charged silence broken only by whispered exchanges among attorneys and staff. "Your Honor," Daniels' attorney began, "we maintain that Officer Daniels acted appropriately given the circumstances. Surveillance footage shows Ms. Cole with hospital property outside authorized areas. There is reasonable cause to believe theft may have occurred." Mariah's fingers tightened around her notes. The courtroom seemed to close in, the lights glaring. She inhaled, letting her training as both a nurse and director kick in. Calm observation, precision, facts over emotion. Marcus rose, voice steady, resonant. "Your Honor, we will demonstrate that Ms. Cole's actions were entirely authorized. Her identification clearly displayed her authority. Surveillance footage confirms proper handling of hospital property. Furthermore, Officer Daniels' behavior displays a pattern of racial profiling, previously documented in internal complaints ignored by the department." The courtroom murmured. Daniels' jaw twitched. His lawyer's face darkened, and he snapped, "Objection! Allegations of prior behavior are irrelevant to today's proceedings." The judge's gavel silenced him. "Overruled. Context is critical in assessing bias and conduct." Witnesses began their testimony. Nurses who had seen Mariah at work, staff who had observed Daniels' aggressive interactions with other minority employees, and HR representatives who recalled dismissed complaints were called. Each account, delivered under oath, chipped away at Daniels' authority, exposing inconsistencies and pattern evidence. Mariah leaned forward, eyes fixed on the proceedings. Every testimony reinforced a narrative she had lived, the silent assumptions, the dismissals, the abuse of unchecked power. Dialogue dominated the courtroom, the spoken word carrying the weight of history, institutional inertia, and human prejudice. Daniel shifted uncomfortably as one nurse recounted the morning incident. He approached Director Cole, ignored her badge, and cuffed her despite visible authorization. It was humiliating, unnecessary, and racially charged. Daniel's defense attorney attempted to redirect. She was in a restricted area. Security protocol mandates action. "Protocol requires verification," Marcus countered. "Not humiliation. Not handcuffs on a professional performing her duties. Bias informed the interpretation of protocol in this case." A security officer testified next, detailing footage showing Daniel's selective attention, ignoring white staff handling similar equipment without incident. Mariah's heart beat steadily. Each confirmation solidified the case. The courtroom leaned into dialogue, the facts layered into testimony like bricks in a wall of justice. Midway through the day, Daniels was called to testify. His posture was defensive, voice tight. "I followed procedure," he insisted. "I acted on reports and camera footage. I saw behavior that warranted intervention." "Behavior authorized by her position?" Marcus asked sharply. "Cuffing a hospital director for performing her duties? Isn't that excessive?" Daniels faltered, fingers drumming nervously on the table. I was cautious. Procedures require verification. I made a judgment call." "You acted on assumptions," Marcus said. "Assumptions informed by race, reinforced by unchecked authority, and ignored complaints. This is precisely why systemic change is necessary." Mariah remained silent, observing, cataloging every detail. The courtroom's dialogue flowed like a current, tension rising with each contradiction Daniels stumbled over. Witnesses returned to fill gaps, other incidents of bias, ignored complaints, inconsistent reports. The narrative became clear. Daniels' actions were not isolated. They were systemic, a reflection of broader institutional failure. The judge paused, scanning both tables. The court acknowledges the complexity and societal implications of this case. We will review evidence, testimony, and patterns of behavior before rendering judgment. Mariah's jaw clenched slightly. She had expected nothing less than deliberation. Yet, the emotional toll was visible. Colleagues and staff members in the gallery whispered, some holding back tears, others shaking their heads in disbelief. The courtroom was no longer just a space of law. It was a theater exposing human flaws, institutional failures, and individual courage. During recess, Mariah stepped outside, inhaling the crisp air. Cameras clicked. Reporters murmured questions she could not answer. Flashes punctuated her vision. She thought of the hospital hallways, the ICU, her colleagues navigating uncertainty, and the weight of expectation pressing down on her shoulders. A fellow staff member, who had come to observe, whispered, "You're doing what no one else could. Exposing the truth. It's heavy, but necessary." Mariah nodded. "It's not about me. It's about preventing this for everyone else. It's about accountability." Back in the courtroom, the afternoon session began. Daniel's defense grew increasingly strained, contradictions mounting. A prior complaint surfaced, dismissed years ago but relevant under cross-examination. Dialogue between attorneys highlighted procedural gaps, ignored warnings, and systemic failures that permitted repeated misconduct. Finally, a critical moment arrived. Daniels made a statement meant to shift blame. "I was following protocol. If she had shown proper conduct." Marcus interrupted, voice cutting like steel. "Your Honor, this statement reflects the same assumptions that led to an unwarranted arrest. It underscores a systemic bias embedded in your client's actions." The judge's eyes narrowed. "Noted. The court will weigh all evidence, testimony, and procedural context carefully. We are committed to ensuring justice is served impartially." As the day ended, Mariah stepped out, shoulders tight, pulse steady but heavy with exhaustion. The trial was not over. Dialogue had exposed power imbalances, revealed bias, and illuminated the emotional cost of standing against systemic injustice. Every word she had spoken, every witness testimony, and every contradiction in Daniel's statements had shifted the narrative. Yet the resolution remained uncertain. The tension lingered, palpable, like static in the air, a reminder that justice required vigilance, strategy, and endurance. Mariah's resolve had hardened. Daniel's authority had been challenged publicly. The fight was far from over, but the foundation for truth, accountability, and eventual justice had been laid. Mariah sat in a small conference room with Marcus and a few key hospital staff. The walls were bare, the fluorescent lights casting a clinical glare over stacks of files, USB drives, and printed security footage. Today's task was clear: consolidate every piece of evidence that would dismantle Daniel's narrative. "Start with the security footage," Marcus instructed. "We need timestamps, context, and cross-references to staff logs. Every angle matters." A tech specialist played clips from the ICU cameras. Mariah pointed out precise moments. Her ID visible, her hands handling authorized equipment, and Daniels approaching aggressively, ignoring her credentials. Every frame highlighted his selective perception. "Look at this," she said, voice tight but steady. He ignored 3 white staff handling similar materials in the same corridor 10 minutes earlier. "Pattern evidence is clear." Marcus nodded. "We'll catalog it." Then staff statements, every nurse who witnessed the incident. Cross-reference their reports with internal HR files on Daniels. Previous complaints, ignored or dismissed, will show repeated misconduct. A senior nurse chimed in, "I can testify to other incidents. I've documented times when he was verbally aggressive towards staff of color. It wasn't reported because no one believed it would make a difference." Mariah's jaw clenched. "That's the point. This isn't isolated. It's systemic. The legal team needs to show it as a pattern, not just one wrongful arrest." Hours passed in meticulous preparation. Dialogue dominated the room. Staff recounting events, clarifying sequences, and corroborating each other's observations. Mariah mediated, correcting minor inaccuracies, ensuring consistency, and preparing statements for court. Later, Marcus reviewed past complaints against Daniels. "Hey," he said, sliding a folder across the table. 3 prior instances of aggressive behavior, all toward minority staff, all dismissed. This will show deliberate neglect and bias in enforcement. Mariah examined the documents, her mind calculating the courtroom strategy. Each complaint, once overlooked, now became ammunition. Daniel's abuse of power could no longer hide behind procedural formalities or institutional inaction. The media aspect had to be managed carefully. A communications officer joined, outlining how to handle press inquiries. Mariah reviewed statements aloud, ensuring language was precise, professional, and unassailable. Missteps could be weaponized, and she would not allow Daniel's narrative to dominate public perception. By evening, the room was tense but focused. Every detail had been scrutinized, every word weighed. Marcus summarized. We have footage, staff testimony, prior complaints, and procedural discrepancies. Tomorrow, we reveal it in court. Daniel's credibility will crumble. Mariah felt a surge of resolve. The humiliation she had endured, the systemic bias she had faced, and the emotional weight of the past week now converged into a strategic offensive. This was not vengeance, it was accountability, and it was methodical. The next day, in the courtroom, the gallery buzzed with anticipation. Journalists, hospital staff, and public observers watched as the evidence was presented. Mariah testified first, calm and precise. She walked the court through the morning of the arrest, referencing security footage, staff statements, and Daniel's aggressive behavior. Director Cole, are you asserting that Officer Daniel's actions were racially biased? Daniel's attorney asked, voice sharp. Mariah held her gaze steady. I am asserting that his actions were informed by assumptions about me based on my race, and that those assumptions led to unnecessary, aggressive treatment. The courtroom murmured. Marcus guided staff witnesses to testify, their dialogue building a coherent narrative of systemic bias. Each statement reinforced the others, creating a pattern impossible to ignore. Then, the prior complaints against Daniels were introduced. A hush fell. The judge examined the documents, and murmurs rippled through the courtroom. The officer's credibility began to unravel, each line of evidence a reflection of unchecked behavior and institutional neglect. Finally, Marcus asked for the ICU footage to be replayed. The contrast between Mariah's calm professionalism and Daniel's aggressive, dismissive actions was undeniable. The jury leaned forward, absorbed. Media cameras captured the moment with intensity, broadcasting Daniel's actions for public scrutiny. Daniel's attorney attempted damage control. Objection. This is selective evidence. Marcus replied sharply, your client's pattern is a point. This is not selective. This is representative of repeated misconduct. The court deserves a full context. The judge allowed the evidence. Daniel's face grew pale. He shifted in his seat, no longer the imposing figure he had been in the precinct. Public exposure of his bias, corroborated by documentation and testimony, left him vulnerable in ways mere arguments could not repair. By late afternoon, the trial had shifted decisively. Daniel's authority and credibility had been exposed, systematically dismantled through factual, precise evidence. Mariah's composure remained unbroken, her resolve unshaken, her professionalism a stark contrast to the unraveling officer. The courtroom adjourned for the day. Mariah stepped outside, sunlight warm on her face. The air felt lighter, the tension easing slightly. Justice had begun its path, methodical and precise. But the emotional cost remained. The trauma of public humiliation, the strain of systemic bias, and the endurance required to navigate every obstacle weighed heavily. Still, the path was clear. Daniel's actions could no longer go unchallenged, and the foundation of truth had been laid. Poetic justice was on its way, calculated, inevitable, and anchored in irrefutable evidence. The courtroom was silent as the judge's gavel hit the bench. The words that followed were measured, deliberate, yet heavy with consequence. Officer Daniels was found liable for abuse of authority and racial profiling. The judge imposed disciplinary action, immediate suspension from the force, mandatory retraining programs, and a public report documenting his misconduct. The verdict rippled through the gallery, a mixture of relief, vindication, and the sobering weight of the ordeal just endured. Mariah remained seated, wrists folded, exhaling slowly. The tension that had gripped her for days eased slightly, but her body still hummed with a residual stress. Justice had been delivered, but the emotional cost lingered. She had faced public humiliation, threats to her professional authority, and the suffocating knowledge that systemic bias had nearly silenced her. Outside the courthouse, staff and supporters greeted her. Reporters jostled for a quote, but she held up a hand, signaling composure over confrontation. She had been defined by their lenses once. Now, she refused to allow their narrative to dominate. At the hospital, her return was quiet but symbolic. Hallways that had been tense with whispers now buzzed with cautious optimism. Nurses, administrators, and staff gathered, some tentatively, some with visible relief, acknowledging the resilience she had shown. "Welcome back, Director Cole," Martha said, her voice firm but warm. "You've proven more than anyone could have imagined." Mariah shook her head slightly, not in humility but in acknowledgement of reality. "I didn't just do this for me," she said. "Every staff member who feels unseen, every patient who relies on fairness and safety, this matters for them." In the boardroom, a meeting was called to implement institutional reforms. Procedures for law enforcement interactions were rewritten. HR protocols were revised to ensure every complaint was documented and acted upon without bias. Staff training on racial sensitivity and authority misuse became mandatory. The hospital, scarred by the incident, now stood on a foundation of accountability reinforced by lived experience. Yet even with these victories, Mariah felt the invisible weight of trauma. Each corridor she walked carried a memory of humiliation, the sting of cuffs, the whispers of uncertainty. She had reclaimed her authority, but the scars remained. The experience had sharpened her awareness of systemic flaws, and she knew the fight against bias was ongoing. Justice had been served in this case, but the work of vigilance, education, and reform would never truly end. During a staff briefing, Mariah addressed the team. "We have made progress, but we must remain vigilant. Authority and bias are complex, subtle, and persistent. Our job is to recognize them, confront them, and prevent them from undermining our people or our patients." Her voice was calm, precise, carrying the weight of authority earned through struggle. Staff nodded, absorbing her words. Dialogue flowed freely now, open and transparent. Questions about procedures, concerns about accountability, and reflections on the trial were shared. Mariah facilitated, listened, and guided, ensuring that the lessons of the ordeal were integrated into daily operations. Later, in her office, Mariah sat quietly, reviewing documents from the trial. The room was still, her reflection mirrored in the polished surface of her desk. Evidence folders, statements, and notes were meticulously arranged, a testament to the strategy, endurance, and precision that had guided her through the chaos. Her phone buzzed, a message from Marcus. "Case closed. Daniels exposed. You handled this with professionalism and strength. Take time to recover. The fight is won, but your well-being matters too." Mariah stared at the screen, exhaling slowly. Strength had been necessary, but exhaustion was real. The victory was tangible, but it had come at a cost: physical tension, emotional strain, and the constant awareness that systemic bias did not vanish overnight. She stood and walked through the hospital, corridors now familiar and reassuring. Patients' monitors beeped softly, staff moved with renewed focus, and the hum of the building returned to a rhythm of care rather than tension. Mariah's presence was both literal and symbolic, authority restored, vigilance heightened, and resilience demonstrated. In the quiet of her office later, she allowed herself a rare pause. The ordeal had tested her, exposed the vulnerabilities of individuals within powerful systems, and forced confrontation with prejudice in its most direct form. Yet, it had also revealed strength, solidarity, and the capacity for change when injustice is met with clarity and persistence. The hospital's operation stabilized, media coverage subsided, and Daniel's exposure served as both warning and precedent. But Mariah knew the subtle forms of bias, institutional neglect, and abuse of power persisted in less visible corners. Vigilance, documentation, and ethical leadership would remain essential tools in combating injustice. As she gazed out of the window at the city skyline, Mariah allowed herself a quiet acknowledgement. Justice had been served, authority restored, and lessons hard-earned. The scars of the experience would linger, shaping her leadership, empathy, and strategic insight. She had faced humiliation, systemic failure, and personal vulnerability, and emerged not unscathed, but unbroken, resolute, and prepared to safeguard the integrity of the hospital and the dignity of every person within its walls. Her reflection lingered in the glass. Strong, composed, and aware. The battle was won, but the vigilance would continue. The hospital auditorium was packed, a mix of staff, local community members, and media representatives. Mariah stood at the podium, facing rows of expectant eyes. The tension in the air was palpable, yet different from the courtroom. Here, there was curiosity, concern, and hope. She adjusted the microphone, her voice steady, projecting calm authority. "Thank you all for coming," she began. "What happened last week was not just an isolated incident. It was a reflection of broader societal and institutional failings. We have a responsibility to confront these issues openly and to ensure that every person in this hospital feels safe, respected, and heard." A hand went up from a young nurse in the front row. "Director Cole, how do we prevent something like this from happening again?" Mariah nodded, anticipating the question. "Through transparency, accountability, and systemic reform. We've implemented new protocol for interactions with law enforcement, mandatory sensitivity training, and clear reporting procedures. But it's also about vigilance, questioning assumptions, speaking up when something feels wrong, and supporting each other." The room was silent for a moment, then murmurs of agreement spread. A community leader stood, voice steady but tinged with emotion. "Your courage has inspired more than your staff. People in this city are watching. Your perseverance shows that one voice, backed by truth and strategy, can challenge systemic bias." Mariah's chest tightened. She had always understood the weight of her position, but seeing it magnified in public acknowledgement was new. This was no longer just about her personal vindication. It was about communal awareness and accountability. A local journalist raised a hand, microphone poised. "Director Cole, do you believe Officer Daniels represents a wider problem in law enforcement?" Mariah exhaled slowly. "I believe his actions reflect a pattern of unchecked authority that can manifest in racial bias. While not every officer behaves this way, systems that fail to hold individuals accountable allow misconduct to persist. We must confront it, not ignore it." Questions continued about hospital policies, about staff rights, about community oversight. Each answer was deliberate, precise, measured. Dialogue became education, transparency, and empowerment, replacing fear with understanding. After the session, staff members gathered around Mariah. Martha, the senior nurse, spoke softly. "You've done more than fight for yourself. You've given us tools to protect ourselves. That matters more than words can express." Mariah allowed herself a small nod. Gratitude mingled with the residual weight of the ordeal. "It's not enough to react to injustice," she said. "We must build systems that prevent it. Every policy, every procedure, every conversation contributes to that. Courage alone isn't enough. Action is required." Meanwhile, Marcus updated her on the ongoing legal ramifications. Daniel's suspension had been extended indefinitely, and internal investigations had identified other instances of bias that would inform future policy and potential disciplinary action. The ripple effect of exposure was real, systematic, and irreversible. In the following days, hospital staff began to take proactive steps. Workshops on bias recognition were scheduled. HR implemented a confidential reporting system for misconduct. Staff meetings included open dialogue about assumptions, communication, and authority. Slowly, the hospital began to feel like a place of protection again rather than tension. Mariah walked through the ICU one morning, observing staff interacting with patients, monitoring equipment, and coordinating care. The atmosphere was lighter, more cooperative. Conversations were open, questions were answered without fear, and a shared understanding of accountability permeated the space. A nurse approached her quietly. "Director Cole, thank you for not letting us be silenced." "For not letting him." She gestured vaguely toward the precinct news clip circulating online. "Define us our worth." Mariah smiled faintly. "Every person here deserves dignity. That's what I fought for, and what we will continue to fight for together. Systems must work for people, not against them." Outside the hospital, community members had begun to engage more actively. Local advocacy groups and civic organizations reached out to support staff training and oversight committees. Mariah realized the battle extended beyond the hospital walls. Exposure, accountability, and dialogue was starting to influence broader systems, bridging institutional reform with social consciousness. Yet the emotional residue remained. Mariah acknowledged the private costs, the humiliation, the fear, the sleepless nights, the constant awareness of systemic bias. These scars were invisible but real, shaping her leadership, empathy, and vigilance. The fight against injustice was ongoing, but she had established precedent and clarity. That evening, Mariah sat in her office, reviewing the week's developments. Staff reports, community messages, and legal updates filled her screen. She allowed herself a moment of reflection. The courtroom battle had ended. Daniel's authority had been dismantled, and the hospital's culture was shifting toward accountability. But the work of sustaining change, confronting bias, and mentoring future leaders would continue indefinitely. She sent a message to the board. Policies implemented, staff informed, community engaged. Progress is steady. Thank you for supporting transparency in action. As the sun set beyond the city skyline, Mariah looked out over the hospital grounds. The institution had weathered scandal, public scrutiny, and systemic flaws. She had endured personal humiliation, navigated legal and institutional complexities, and emerged as both a symbol and an agent of justice. The fight had been grueling, the emotional cost undeniable, but the impact was tangible. Systemic accountability, staff empowerment, and community awareness. Mariah's leadership was no longer just administrative. It was moral, strategic, and enduring. Weeks after the trial, the hospital had begun to settle into a new rhythm. The immediate tension of Daniel's arrest and public exposure had dissipated, replaced by a cautious stability. Mariah walked through the corridors, observing staff and patients with a measured calm. She had regained her authority, but the scars of public humiliation and systemic betrayal were still present in quiet ways. Staff still glanced at her occasionally with residual concern. Patients whispered, and the memory of the trial lingered like a shadow. The news media had largely moved on, but local outlets ran follow-up stories highlighting Daniel's suspension and the reforms implemented at the hospital. The reports were careful, professional, and undeniably in her favor. For the first time since the ordeal began, she allowed herself a small sense of vindication, not for personal satisfaction, but because truth had been recorded, accountability enforced. Daniels, meanwhile, faced consequences beyond the courtroom. Internal police investigations exposed a series of mishandled complaints and patterns of discriminatory behavior. His colleagues were compelled to provide testimony, and disciplinary boards recommended permanent removal from positions of authority. What he had intended as a display of dominance now became the vehicle for his downfall. Poetic justice, measured and precise, had been delivered. In her office, Mariah met with a senior leadership team to review the hospital's new policies. Mandatory bias training, documented reporting procedures, and oversight committees were now standard. Staff could escalate concerns without fear of dismissal or retaliation. Dialogue became structured and transparent, replacing uncertainty and whispered fears with accountability and clarity. Martha, the senior nurse, approached with a gentle smile. "You've changed the hospital, Director Cole, not just by winning in court, but by changing how we operate, how we treat each other." Mariah allowed herself a brief, reflective nod. It wasn't about me. It was about everyone here. Every staff member, every patient, every overlooked complaint. Authority must be checked, and integrity must be enforced. In quieter moments, she reflected on the emotional toll. Months of fear, humiliation, and vigilance had left a mark. The trauma was invisible but real, shaping her leadership style, her awareness of bias, and her vigilance towards systemic flaws. She knew that resilience wasn't about erasing scars. It was about using them to strengthen judgment, empathy, and resolve. Community outreach became part of the hospital's focus. Mariah attended meetings with local organizations, advocating for accountability, systemic transparency, and protective policies for public institutions. Her experience became a blueprint for reform, a case study in challenging entrenched bias while maintaining professionalism and authority. Dialogue shifted from reactive to proactive, empowering others to recognize and confront injustice. Late one evening, she reviewed the final documentation from Marcus. The legal records, testimony, and evidence had been archived meticulously, a permanent record of both abuse and accountability. Daniel's pattern of misconduct was clear for future oversight, and the hospital now possessed a framework to prevent similar incidents. Mariah allowed herself a quiet exhale, recognizing completion of a crucial chapter. Her office phone buzzed, another message from a hospital board member. All reforms implemented. Staff reports indicate improved morale. Your leadership has had measurable impact. Take a moment for yourself. You've earned it. Mariah placed the phone down and leaned back in her chair, letting the stillness envelop her. The city skyline outside the window shimmered with the light of a setting sun, a symbol of both closure and ongoing vigilance. The poetic justice delivered to Daniels was tangible, yet Mariah knew that systemic accountability required constant attention, transparency, and courage. Walking through the hospital one last time that evening, she observed staff moving confidently, patients receiving attentive care, and a sense of professional integrity permeating the air. The institution had endured scandal, public scrutiny, and systemic flaws, and emerged stronger. Dialogue, transparency, and strategic leadership had rewritten its narrative. Mariah paused at the ICU entrance, looking at her team. "We've rebuilt trust," she said softly, more to herself than anyone else. "But we must maintain it every day, in every interaction. That is the cost of authority and the responsibility of integrity." As she turned toward her office, she reflected on the journey: humiliation, injustice, legal battles, systemic exposure, and finally, accountability. The experience had demanded courage, clarity, and resilience, but it had also demonstrated that truth, combined with strategy and moral leadership, could prevail over bias and abuse. For Mariah, the victory was not simply personal. It was institutional and societal. The hospital's corridors, once tense and uncertain, now echoed with measured confidence. The staff moved with assurance, patients were reassured, and Daniel's downfall stood as a reminder of the consequences of unchecked power. She allowed herself one final, quiet moment at her office window. The city lights flickered below, indifferent yet reflecting her perseverance. The journey had left scars, but it had also forged resilience, clarity, and a renewed commitment to justice. Authority, once threatened, had been reclaimed, not through vengeance, but through truth, preparation, and strategic action. And though the fight against bias and injustice would never end entirely, Mariah Cole had ensured that her voice, and the voices of those she represented, would never again be ignored.